This is Peak Earth. I'm Case Bradford. Thank you for tuning in to this episode with Brian Maierhofer. I met Brian through a fantastic synchronicity, and we share that story at the beginning of this episode and then dive deep into synchronicity, somatic healing, subconscious mind, the power of purpose, meaning, myth, and much more. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation with Brian. We went deep, and I appreciate you tuning in to listen. If you'd like to contribute to Peak Earth, here are 3 ways that take about 3 seconds. You could leave a 5-star review on the Apple app or the Spotify app. If you are listening to this, you could subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you could share it with everyone that you encounter over the next 30 days. That would help out a lot. I'd really appreciate that. It's a small contribution to help Peak Earth reach more listeners, which I think is pretty cool. If you don't do any of that, that's cool too. Thanks for listening. This episode was sponsored by Synchronicity. Synchronicity is the way in which the soul of the world communicates to us. Little winks, nudges, or breadcrumbs that we are on the right path to realizing our personal legend. I hope that this conversation with Brian helps illuminate the world in a new way, gives you a new lens of perception and perspective on the world to enrich and enliven the fabric of reality. Thanks again for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy this episode with Brian Maierhofer. How are you?
Very well, Case. Thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
Absolutely
What a
stoked.
pleasure.
Really excited to connect with you, and this is a long time coming. Something we tried to get together over a year ago, and a lot has transpired since then. And you're living a fascinating life, and I'm stoked to be able to create this episode with you.
Thanks, man. For sure. I appreciate it. I feel like we need to tell the story of how we met.
You want to tell it?
Yeah, I mean, I just so I remember being in a yoga class. I was sitting in the back of the yoga studio, and there was just an absolute house at the front of the yoga studio with just a cobra back there, doing handstands, just ripping it. I'm like, who is this guy, man? Just like couldn't keep my eyes off you, no homo. And then I got home and I checked my Twitter, and somebody was traveling to LA. They were looking for somebody to meet or do a pod or something. And I think it was our mutual friend, Jack Moses, who had tagged both of us under the same comments. And so I go and I look at the profile and I'm like, who is this guy? And I'm like, holy shit, this is the dude who was in the yoga class not 20 minutes ago. So I shot you a DM, and then you were nice enough to invite me to one of your movement meetups, I think it was. And we met at the beach, and the rest is history, man. I think that was about 2.5-ish years ago. So some nice synchronicities there.
It's a wild synchronicity.
It's a wild synchronicity.
I know that synchronicities play a role in your life as they do in mine. How do you perceive synchronicities?
That's a great question, man. Well, they are these moments when our sort of our inner world finds its counterpart in the external, right? This moment of collapse between sort of maybe the immaterial world and the material world. And so I'm a bit of a Jungian, Carl Jung. I got my my master's in depth psychology. So, Carl Jung I'm a huge fan of Carl Jung. And yeah, it's something that, throughout my entire life that have been revealing itself, and something that I, constantly look to follow. Don't look to create, don't look to manipulate, but definitely look to follow those winks that the universe gives me, for sure.
What does the existence of synchronicity signal to you?
It's a great question. I think that they are permission slips and acknowledgement that you're on your path, that you're on the right path. I think they can also be slight nudges from the universe, right? I think often I have dream images, moments in dreams that sort of like linger, and then I'll see that same sort of image or same sort of nudge in the physical world in my life, right? And so it's often a permission slip, kind of like an exhale. Okay, like I'm here, I'm on my path, I am living my one true way, or simultaneously, subtle nudges in the right direction too.
One of the main things I love connecting with you is that we can really drop into a deep conversation. We're already going right there, so I'm excited to keep pulling on this thread of synchronicity and signs of being on the right path. I suppose what this reveals is that there are wrong paths that we could be on.
Yeah, and I don't even know if I would go that far. My approach to life. I don't seek to manipulate my world. I have, as we all do, I think, such a tendency to try and control things. And I really believe that, in so many ways, acceptance is kind of the answer to everything. And I don't think that it's a bit like a GPS, I guess, maybe. I do believe that there is something within us, and it is our duty to sort of bring it forward. So one of my favorite phrases, sayings, piece of scripture is from the Gospel of Thomas, which is in the canonical Bible, but it's attributed to Christ. And it's a Gnostic text. And he says, if you bring forth what is within you will save you. But if you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. So I believe that we do have a bit of a soul contract, that we have a divine blueprint that exists within us, right? And so we simultaneously have the acorn and the oak at the same time. And it is our job to put ourselves in a position to receive it. And that can be done in so many different ways. And there's so many different tools to work with and to create that atmosphere oneself, to receive that. So I do believe that we have something unique that we must bring forth within us, a part of our life path, our unique path, our soul contract, our offering to this world. And it's a bit of a GPS, right? Like, you take a wrong turn, suddenly the coordinates begin to reroute you. In so many ways, I feel that, the big moments of our lives, the big relationships, the big labors, that's a part of our karma, that those are built within like the blueprint that I'm talking about, within that acorn and within that oak. But I don't think it's precious either. I think there's a lot of room to be aimless, to be whimsical. I think that is a part of the path too. But it is sort of, for me, it's forever following some of those intuitive nudges. And they don't just exist within my internal world, right? Like, I often look to the people around me too. Like, I believe that God exists in the space between you and I, right? And so very often some of that blueprint or those nudges, they'll come through the people closest to me. It's just my job to have a frame to stay open to that reception, which is easier said than done for so many reasons we'll get into. I'm sure we'll talk about the nervous system a little bit, but yeah.
Absolutely. And that was a beautiful riff. And what came to mind was an acorn. And when you think about an acorn, there's no way you would ever guess that would turn into a giant, gorgeous oak tree. But when it's planted in the ground, it's given the right nutrients, it grows. And every one is unique with the way the branches spiral and tendril out and absorb the sun. And you see a full-grown oak and think, good God, that thing is marvelous.
Marvelous, man. And so unique in the same way, we all have a unique fingerprint. And so I do a lot of work in somatic therapy, and I work with the nervous system a lot. And so you'll see folks having big somatic releases, and they have sort of spinal waves and stuff like that. And one of my favorite writers and thinkers and practitioners is this guy named Donnie Epstein. And he's done a lot of work within the sort of geometry of those waves and what it looks like. And each one of our waves is unique as well too. Our spinal waves is just as unique as our fingerprint. Super interesting.
It really is. So there's so much about us that is indicative of something deeper at play. The fingerprints are a wonderful reminder of the uniqueness within each of us. We've got 20 reminders, and then I believe everyone has a very unique body, mind, and path to play and role to play on this planet.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Yeah. So, I can tell a story of one of my big synchronicities, one of my big moments that felt orchestrated, right? And whether it was or not, that's how my psyche received it, right? And so it was. So when I was 20 years old, I ended up pulling myself out of college. I was in college in Charleston, South Carolina. And I had taken my education for granted. I was partying a lot, substances, women, and I hit a massive low point. And I don't know what it was within me, but I decided to pick up the phone and I called my pops, and I needed to get out of there. And so I ended up moving to a wilderness therapy farm in Hawaii for about 6 months. And so it was individual therapy, group therapy, working on the farm all day. And this entire time, I had some resistance to the process. And even though I had put myself there, I wanted to go back. I felt like I'd abandoned my friends. I'd abandoned that path. I wanted to go back to that same school, even though intuitively I knew that it probably wasn't the best thing for me. And so this one afternoon, it was Halloween. I know it was Halloween because I was wearing a dress at the time. We had gone to some thrift store to get some Halloween costumes. So the absurdity of this moment, I'm on a dress and I'm sitting out on, I guess, this little like overlook of the waters there in Hawaii. And I'm bargaining with God. I'm talking to God and I'm like, man, I want to go back. And it was just like, I felt, and this was the synchronicity, I felt really bloated in my life. I felt like I had so much within me that needed to come out. And I just had this like bloated sense and I couldn't, the tears were coming a little bit, but I just felt heavy and dense and bloated. And so again, I'm bargaining with God and I have this whole thing and maybe I'm cursing the heavens and whatever. And I'm wearing a dress and it's absurd. And then I look over down into the water and there was this big blowfish and it was fully blown up. And I just had this moment of connecting with it. And then it sort of collapsed into itself as well. And in that moment, like that was how I felt. And I was looking for that same release. I was looking for that same sort of, that same release. And it was in that moment that I knew, as much as my ego, as much as I wanted to go back to school, as much as I wanted to pick up where I left off, I knew it wasn't right for me. And there's something about like the theater of the absurd in that moment. Like I'm wearing a dress, I'm crying, I'm talking to God. And then it was just the simplicity of this animal, of this blowfish. And there was such medicine in it for me.
So much there. And it makes me think of what we were talking about with each person being unique and everyone having a path. And if you're seeing the path laid out before you, you're on somebody else's path.
Absolutely.
And all the knights who are around King Arthur's table, they would be led off into the woods to find their own path as a metaphor for the spiritual journey that we're talking about. And when I think about the blowfish being inflated like that, it's in a sympathetic state. Its nervous system is dysregulated. It's in this very defensive state, which many people are trapped within today.
For sure. I think that we live in an epidemic of survival mode. I think I'm definitely not a fatalist. For sure, I don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, but I do think that there is a bit of a great return to what makes us human and to what connects us to nature and the rhythms of nature. And it really is our nervous system that is that ultimate antenna. And in so many ways, it is sort of a portal to nature, and it is also, your nervous system is your filter for reality. And the best way that I could explain this is, again, in that sympathetic state, right? So you have something in front of you that you need to fight or you need to flee from. You're in a threat, right? All of your energy is completely focused on the thing directly in front of you. And so you end up becoming like a horse on a horse track where they have blinders on. They literally can't see. They don't have the acuity to recognize what's possible beyond these blinders, right? So when you're in survival mode, when you're in a sympathetic state, you're not able, your sensory system isn't able to receive the other stimuli that are available in your environment that may be helpful or conducive. So your possibilities are extremely limited, right? And so then vice versa, in a parasympathetic state, there's a real diffusion of your energy where suddenly those blinders come off. Your body's spatial orientation is able to expand out into the space in which you're in, and suddenly you're able to receive more of reality. You're receiving more stimulus from your environment. You're receiving more possibilities and opportunities, right? So there's more there, but I'm going to pause.
You'd also be able to receive more winks from the universe, more clues, more synchronicity as well, I imagine.
Big time, for sure. Yeah, it's such an interesting thing, especially with, a lot of my work these last couple of years has been exploring the way that our bodies metabolize space, right? And so, I know you're an athlete, right? So like opening up our proprioception, our proprioceptive cues, right? And so a great way to explain this, again, you look at athletes. So LeBron James or Nikola Jokic in basketball, they say that they have incredible court mapping, meaning that without visually looking at where everyone else is on the field, they're able to feel it. And it's because they have super wide proprioceptive sense. Their sensate awareness is way stronger in those moments than their intellect, right? And so I believe that the way that the body metabolizes space is equal to our health, is equal to the amount of time that we get on this planet.
I imagine this is also linked with the quality of life that we're able to absorb. So of course, we have the quantity of life, which is one thing, which almost feels a little bit out of our control to some degree. I think we can do some things to mitigate and manage that, to extend it maybe a certain percentage, despite what fate has in store for us. But the quality of life we enjoy on a daily basis is really within our control to a relatively large degree that most people don't even realize.
And that's so important, that sense. People really need to have a firm belief that they can influence their state and the way that they feel, right? And so that's what's so powerful about somatic work, is that you can get real experience through just some simple practices, some simple intentions, to dictate and influence that internal state. Because so many of us feel like we're a victim to our external environment, a victim to maybe our past traumas, our family, etc. And so having the internal locus of control, right, the agency to influence the way that you feel, is huge. And then being able to recognize how that work then influences your life is then the second piece too, as soon as those possibilities begin to reveal themselves as well. Right?
And that's that blowfish that you saw on the cliff, and why he's stuck with his traumas, he's stuck with the pressure of the moment, he feels trapped. How did you go from that moment to where you are now? What were sort of the next steps that unfolded?
Yeah, man. Well, I'm just somebody who stands on the shoulders of giants, right? Stands on the shoulders of those that came before me. So when I was at that wilderness therapy program, I couldn't get out of the library. Like, they had to put limits around how much time I could spend in the library because they thought it was another escape. And so it really was what you talked about is when I first started to read Joseph Campbell, and I read A Hero with a Thousand Faces, right? And so this motif of the hero who enters the darkest part of the forest, right, and is able to sort of individuate from the cultural norm and kind of go to the edge and go through his road of trials to find the magic elixir, to find his medicine, ultimately to bring it back to culture, right? Because culture itself, the cultural immune system, the center of it, will reject the very thing that it needs. So it takes individuals like you and I who can individuate enough from culture to find that medicine, to bring it back to the community, bring it back in our role and in our service. So really having some symbolic infrastructure around the great myths of masculine development. I'd be happy to share, my favorite with you. Allowed me to begin to see my life through a symbolic lens, right? And so in seeing my life through a symbolic lens, I'm then enrolling my subconscious, because the subconscious operates through symbol, through metaphor, through sensate experience. And very often the mind is just going to want to reject that, right? But as soon as you begin to see sort of the symbolic landscape within your life, you've enrolled more of you, that body mind as well too. And so then you can begin to relate to these symbols in a way that's really alive and fresh and fun. And that's when like the synchronicities begin to really, really kick in.
Powerful.
Yeah.
Once we understand that perception is reality, we can go and access better tools for our perception to sort of gear up and up level to a new higher functioning system, which then brings us into this new higher functioning reality that you speak about.
It's like a new pair of glasses. It's like a new pair of glasses, man. And it is, so our perception is really downstream from our attention, right? And so the way that we pay attention to ourselves, the way we pay attention in relationship, the way that we pay attention to our body, where attention goes is where energy flows, right? And so it really begins with attention, and then you create perception and awareness from that, and then the nervous system state is downstream of that perception and that awareness.
It's a beautiful process. When you explain it like that, it does make it more manageable than, as opposed to just like, oh, everything's happening and I'm like overwhelmed and I'm flustered, and all of a sudden I just make the next snap decision that comes to my mind, which is probably not going to be the healthiest one or the best one for me. And in that same vein, when you brought up the masculine development practice or ritual that you spoke about. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah. This is one of my favorite myths, and it's found. It's a medieval myth, and I know you mentioned the Grail and you mentioned the Knights of the Round Table, and so it's called the myth of the Fisher King. And so when we're looking at myth as a depth psychologist, especially these medieval myths that have to do with a king and a kingdom, the kingdom itself is supposed to represent like the totality of our consciousness, right? And the king in so many ways is supposed to represent like the self with a capital S, with a big S. And so in the myth of the Fisher King, we have our king. And then, a great story wouldn't be a great story if we didn't have a young fool as well, right? Every story begins with a young fool, and we could talk about the psychology of that too. And so the story begins with Parsifal, who's our young fool. And so Parsifal begins on this little quest, or he's walking around the kingdom, and he stumbles upon this man who's fishing on water. And so in all of these myths, water is representative of the unconscious. So the king, he doesn't know he's the king, but this man is fishing on the water. So we know he's unconscious, right? And simultaneously in all of these stories, the king has a wound. And he always has a wound to like the thigh, maybe to the lower belly, to the hip, sometimes directly to the genitals. It's supposed to represent the generative function. He's lost his ability to generate for his kingdom because of this wound, and therefore the kingdom is in disarray, right? And so Parsifal stumbles upon this man. He watches him fishing, and he notices that he has this wound. And he has this innate impulse to ask this man, what happened to you? What happened? And he decides to suppress that instinct, and he doesn't ask him. And so then Parsifal has to go on this whole hero's journey, this whole road of trials, and he slays a dragon, and he rescues the fair maiden, and there's a lot of symbolism in that too. We could get into that. And so he goes through this massive road of trials basically to undergo his own suffering and his own wounding. And then he returns back to the kingdom, and once again here's this man on the lake, on the water, fishing. But this time he knows his wound, he knows his suffering. So he leans in and he asks the king, what happened to you? And in that moment, the king is immediately healed, and the kingdom is healed. The kingdom begins flourishing. And so for me, this myth is really informing us that empathy is the magic. And that empathy is actually the very thing that unlocks our masculine generative force, right? Empathy is the greater fuel, way more so than domination.
Empathy is what unlocks our masculine force. What is empathy?
That's a great question, man. Well, it's different than sympathy. Sympathy in the sense that I feel bad for you. I can maybe feel your pain and have some access to it, but it doesn't necessarily come from direct experience of a similar wounding or a similar pain. And so empathy is that kind of mirrored moment, right? As I said before, like God exists in the space between you and I, right? And so being able to feel into also that, the deep suffering that, most men have here that are unwilling to talk about, and being able to lead from that place in a generative masculine way, it begins to create a fabric and sort of equality, a fabric of humanity, a fabric of being able to stand shoulder to shoulder with the man next to you, right? Which I think is really important for men. And so there is, again, in a lot of these myths, and we see them in movies too, we can look at True Grit. So True Grit, there's kind of an old grizzled man, and then there's a young girl, right? And so in symbol and in sort of depth psychology, there's always two things existing at once, not just one, right? And so these two characters are intricately, connected. And so the older grizzled man, he sort of lost his empathy because of the will to power, right? He sort of represents this kind of like false sense of power, false empowerment, this like dryness that can come from just living a life dictated by power or conquest or whatever it is. And the young girl represents innocence, right? And so throughout their dance, throughout the story, throughout the myth, these two sort of compensatory, sort of like dual functions, they begin to relate and dance with one another. And what happens is that true empathy, true humanity, true beauty is born out of that relationship.
It's a powerful reflection on a connection that many people are almost being starved of today.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. And again, I'm not a fatalist. I'm not somebody who looks at the world around us and looks at maybe some of our systems, but looks at our cultural or institutions and just thinks we need to tear it all down and build it back up, right? But there is I think ultimately more so than anything else, people have lost the ability to trust their own felt sense, their own intuition, right? And so the reclamation of that like internal knowing, right? It connects you to something ancient, right? Carl Jung talked about being able to look through your ancient eyes, right? He also had this quote. He's talking about God, and he said, yeah, most people don't find God because they don't look low enough, right? So like looking into the earth, looking into the ground, looking into our relationship to this living being, Gaia, right? Peak Earth. It's alive. And we have to be able to go into the depths of ourselves, into the body, mind, into the subconscious, to be able to look at ourselves and look at the world through those ancient eyes. And from there, there's a reclamation of something divine, which is this innate sort of, as I said, kind of tapestry, this fabric of which we're all a part of and all have a role in ultimately too.
There is a certain kind of feeling or energy or life that I'm able to activate only when I spend enough time in nature, only when I'm around other living things, the sun, the air, the trees, the soil, and it does sort of get muted and detrimented by being inside, by being on a computer screen, by being sucked into technology, by being forced to, or at least choosing to spend a lot of my time in that way.
So how do you know when you feel that and when you're feeling connected and when you have that moment, maybe you've been a little disconnected and then you kind of drop in, right? And I know there's an intuitive sense of it, but how do you know? How do you know that's that feeling?
That's a really important question. I think everyone has got to figure that out on their own. And for me, it does feel like a sense akin to any other biological sense. Like, I'm tired, I need to sleep. My bladder is full, I need to go relieve myself. It is this biological need that I begin to feel, that I just have this urge or craving to kind of reconnect as best I can wherever I am. And even if it's right at, say, for example, get off an airplane and I'm waiting for a car to come pick me up, I'll be the guy who takes his shirt off, takes his shoes off, and just sits in the grass out in front of the airport.
Yeah.
Because I know that that's what I need in that moment.
Big time, man. Yeah, it's no accident that, I spent some time on Twitter before I ever really started posting, was kind of in the wellness community, and you're seeing like, barefoot shoes or like light pollution and all of this stuff. My own healing journey and my individual journey, it really coincided with when I started taking that stuff seriously, and there's and still like family, friends or whatever, I'm wearing red light blockers. I'm like in the airport with the fluorescent blockers, whatever. And like people think it's a little hokey, a little woo woo or whatever, but don't knock it till you try it. Like there's something so palpable when you find that thing again, whatever it is. And that is kind of like I started, that is the process of beginning to bring forth what is within you. That is that seed. And so I think, fighting for that and holding on to that, like I have worked so hard to find and reclaim my joy. I'm just not willing to sacrifice it for anything. There is nothing more valuable, but it only came from the loss of it from a chunk of a time. Right. And so I do believe the kingdom of heaven is within, right? Like I do believe that, each of us has this sort of internal little mansion of which, which is already built for us, of which we can go and, and rest and find our solitude and find our resolve and find our vigor as well. And for me, meditation has really been the primary practice for that. Big time.
What does your go-to meditation practice look like?
Yeah, well, it's sort of shifted and evolved over the years. I first started off maybe around like my mid 20s doing transcendental meditation. I'm going to butcher his name. I think it's Maharashi, I believe. He was the guy who was like working with the Beatles and all this stuff. And it's a mantra based meditation. 20 minutes twice a day. Super helpful, amazing. And recently I've been exploring a lot of Joe Dispenza. I believe, I'm such a huge fan of his. I think that he is really breaking down the science of mysticism in so many ways. He gets a lot of hate. And also, one of my favorite lineages and one of my favorite teachers who's only been my teacher through books and through some other people that, are within the lineage is Paramahansa Yogananda, the autobiography of a yogi. I don't know if you're familiar with that book. And there's the Self-Realization Fellowship in the Palisades. There's one in Encinitas, right? Swami Beach, where we hung out.
Yes.
And so I'm in this place now where I'm really looking, as I said, to stand on the shoulders of giants. Like I want to follow traditions that have been tried and tested for thousands of years. All the trial and error has been done. But, there is an interesting thing with meditation, and I've seen this with a lot of my clients too, is that for somebody who has PTSD or heavy trauma, they have a hypervigilance, and it's really hard to be safe in their body, right? And so being still can bring a lot of that out. Closing the eyes and being in darkness can bring a lot of that out too. So for me, therapeutically, there is kind of like a back and forth between like leaning on some of these tools such as meditation, breath work, maybe psychedelics, etc., while also grounding it in like the reality of what trauma does to people, what PTSD does to people. And I don't think that, meditation by itself is a fix all. It might be, I don't know, but I always kind of say, you need spirituality and you need psychology. If you have too much spirituality, you run the risk of bypassing your own humanity, right? Bypassing your own shortcomings or trials just kind of with these spiritual ideals. None of it matters anyways. The material is fake. And if you have too much therapy or too much psychology, you run the risk of like over pathologizing yourself, getting too heady, right? So I think it is a dance of back and forth, like looking to the ancients, looking to the tried and tested traditions, while simultaneously working with science and understanding where we're at and really understanding the nature of trauma as well too.
You mentioned the phrase internal locus of control earlier, and when I began to play around with meditation in my early 20s, that was one part of it that I really felt was powerful. Was I experienced an increased internal locus of control. How do you describe what that is for folks who are unfamiliar with that concept?
Yeah, the internal locus of control is the inner knowing that you can influence the direction of your life and how you feel in a positive direction, right? And so an external locus of control would be this sense that life is just happening to me. I'm just at the mercy of the wind and whatever's going on in my life, just kind of getting blown back and forth. And I think it's a bit of like a hybrid once again too, right? Because you hear a lot too that life is happening for me. And I do believe that in so many ways. But again, we need to also be able to lean in, I need to be able to lean on my agency, lean on that internal locus of control and, put a foot down when I need to put a foot down, make a different choice and recognize that I do have the ability to make changes in my life, both internally and externally.
That can play a massive role in addictions. And I know, well, I would guess everyone is struggling with some form of addiction, kind of like at all times, especially with these hyper addicting rectangles we have in our pockets all the time. I think I would assume almost everyone is addicted to those on some level. What is your relationship with addiction? Have you faced addiction at points in your life, and how did you kind of go about facing or slaying that dragon?
Yeah, for sure. Nice metaphor, by the way, dragon. Yeah, I do believe that dependency and compulsion is a natural part of the human experience, especially when it comes to trauma, right? So trauma is an old prediction an old loop that sort of got stuck, and it's trying to complete that cycle, right? So we compulsively do the same things, get in the same relationships, make the same choices, hoping that we're going to get that different result eventually to complete that wave of trauma and allow it to rinse through, right? So yeah, I believe compulsion and some dependence and some addictive tendencies is a natural part of the human experience. I do think that, alcoholism, or like classic sort of hardcore addiction, is its own sort of thing. And there's a couple different, approaches to it. There's a medical model, there's the AA model. Like, I really like the spiritual model, and the big book of AA and the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous actually came from a lineage of Carl Jung, and came from William James, who is the godfather of Western psychology, of American psychology. And so I believe that addiction at its apex is really it's a psycho-spiritual dis-ease. I don't necessarily love kind of like the sense of disease or terminal disease model, but I am one of these people, right? And undoubtedly, the experience as sort of described, especially in the big book of AA, has been my experience with it. And, I think that most addicts and alcoholics, most of them are, I shouldn't say most, a lot of them probably have some aspect of neurodivergency, right? Just sort of they process sensory at a different pace and level and intensity, which is actually an environmental necessity. We can get into that too. And shoot, I'm losing my thought here. Pull me back. And so the 12 steps, right? And whether it's AA or, the food program or the sex program or whatever it is, it holds a timeless psychological process. It holds timeless virtues. And really only the first step within that process has anything to do with the substance. I don't know if you have any exposure or experience to it, but only step number 1 is going to mention a drug or a drink, right? Steps 2 through 12 are deeply spiritual, deeply psychological. And what it does is it allows us to find that appropriate balance between that internal locus of control and the reality that we can't control everything, and that we have to find some acceptance and some grace and learn how to live in the midst of, maybe some external chaos, right? And so what it does is it takes an ego that is super inflated, just depending on itself, just depending on the substance or whatever it does, and it creates a proper sort of size and proportion. It relativizes it to life, or to the self with a capital S. So it is a very slow procedural process of, I'm not going to say ego death, but in shrinking that ego and placing it in proper alignment with something more generative, bigger, more nourishing, right? And sometimes it's just shoulder to shoulder with the guy next to you, right? I do believe in God. For me, it's God. Sometimes it's, they say the, God. Yeah, group of drunks, right? G-O-D, right? Sometimes it's just about surrendering to somebody else's experience or knowing. I think that so many of us are addicted to our thinking, and especially the addict and alcoholic, because all of those wonderful ideas to go pick up or to do this behavior or whatever, it comes from your own thinking. And so the beginning process of these 12 steps and of recovery is really recognizing the limitations of your own thoughts. And thank God, I'm so grateful that there's something beyond my own thinking, And if I look at all the amazing, wonderful, beautiful things in my life, most of them came from a place and happened in a way that I could never have controlled, planned, accounted for, etc. It came from something beyond my own limited perception.
What a beautiful way to look at the question that I served there for you to knock out of the park. And with this idea that you generated there, it made me kind of reconnect to what you were describing earlier of the medieval myths of the man fishing in the water, representing the subconscious mind. And you're sort of teasing at that concept there a little bit, the subconscious mind. And I think it's an important thing to kind of talk about and illuminate a bit more, because it's such a powerful part of us that we don't really learn too much about as we go through life unless we kind of seek out that knowledge from guys like Jung or others. And I'm curious what your thoughts are about the subconscious.
Yeah, for sure. So one of my favorite models to really understand this comes from Robin Carhart Harris, who's a neuroscience psychedelic researcher. So it's a really, really simple model. So we have a primary consciousness and a secondary consciousness. And now you may think that our primary consciousness is going to be our prefrontal cortex, right? Our conscious mind, our ego. But our primary consciousness is actually more of the body and the body mind. So we have all of this information that's flowing up through our body, right? Through the earth, through the channels of our body, up our spine, right? Up our brainstem. And so it's really like a bottom up sense of energy. And so we have our primary consciousness, and then we have this little filter over the top, like a little screen. It's called the default mode network. And so what it's going to do is it's going to filter all of that information from coming up to the secondary consciousness, so we don't get flooded, we don't get overwhelmed, right? We can't just be blasted wide open all the time. And so there's so many ways to play with that filter, right? So when you're doing great somatic work, when you're exploring psychedelics, when you're doing breath work, you're taking that filter and you're just making it a little bit more porous. So more information is going to come up. But what's really important about working with the subconscious mind is that, number one, it's all the material that reveals itself is all relational, meaning that it's alive. So it can't be put in a box. It's not to be labeled. It's not to be packaged. It's meant to be a living thing that you build a relationship with, right? So I have some experience with, dream tending. That was a part of my master's program, was learning how to work with dreams. People always ask me, right? Like, what does this mean? How do I know what it means? I'm like, you're asking the wrong question. The question is, how do I make this alive for me? How am I relating to this, right? How is it in my body? How do I feel when I wake up? It's a living thing. How can I build a relationship to it through art, through community, through whatever it may be? And just remembering that the things, the ways in which, God speaks to us, these nudges, these symbols, these synchronicities, I believe that they're alive just as much as we are, right? And so I think I'm going to pause there. I think that's a good place to pause. I can rant a little bit.
I love just letting you go on these rants and
I know, dude.
Sitting back and listening.
I got a lot to say.
Yeah, I mean, it's a perfect example of kind of what we're talking about. Is you're sort of like you're not conscious. You didn't consciously script what you're saying before. I didn't give you these questions. You're just sort of allowing your subconscious mind to work with the questions and just unload what you've learned over the decades.
Yeah, hard earned. Let me tell you, hard earned. And, some people in my life, they like to talk about, I'm wise. I'm like, yo, like, wise old man one day, young fool the next. Trust me, young fool the next, And so I think that, people can glorify suffering, and that it leads to wisdom, and that you have to suffer. I mean, I just talked about this myth of the Fisher King, right? It definitely has its place, but suffering by itself holds no meaning. But when suffering begets sacrifice, that is where meaning is born, right? And there's a myth here too. We could talk about that a little bit, but yeah, man. I definitely think that I have a unique outlook on the world. I always have. Definitely coming around to, I don't necessarily love the language, but to some neurodivergency, and that I didn't realize that not everybody is like walking around all the time, like unpacking the psychology of the book of Genesis in their brain. Like that's like maybe not like everyone's normal experience, like last night I can't sleep. It's like 2 a.m. Like I'm just like thinking about scripture. You know what I mean? Like, okay, this is who I am. This is what I got. Like, let's roll with it, And I think something has really shifted for me recently, because I was never somebody who had a shortage of confidence. And there were definitely periods in my life where I had a shortage of self-love, but not so much anymore. But what I'm realizing these last couple of years was I didn't really value what I do. I didn't really value the uniqueness of the mind, the uniqueness of that acorn that is within me. And I'm beginning to really value my labor. And as a result of valuing my labor, I'm valuing myself more. So I'm taking care of myself more. And so again, it's shifted my motivation from self to other, right? Because my labor is the connective tissue between self and other. And that's, Yogananda talks about the importance of labor and good works. And, Zoroastrianism is one of my favorite religions. They really emphasize good works. And I didn't really understand that. I definitely wanted to skirt by on some of the laziness or like the curse of the natural and not really value what it is that I'm here to do. And, again, I don't even know why I'm sharing this, but it's just, it's on my mind right now. And I'm feeling the fruits of it. So.
One thing you mentioned there, the myth of meaning, I would love for you to share that. And what came to mind as you were speaking there was a book that was very impactful for me, which was Man's Search for Meaning.
Beautiful.
By Viktor Frankl, a life-changing book. And one of the key concepts there is a man who has a why can bear any how, and the power of purpose. And I'm curious what your reflections are in that realm.
On the book, or on meaning and sacrifice, or the myth, or?
Yes, the myth and on the power of purpose.
The power of purpose. Man, yeah. Okay, well, I'll start with the myth, and I don't know this one quite as well, but it is a myth of Hermes and Apollo. So it's a Greek myth. And so Hermes is the trickster archetype in the Greek myths, okay? And so the trickster archetype represents a lot of different things, but one of the primary things that it represents is our relationship to appetite, to consumption. And so if you think back to, I don't know, sort of like hunter-gatherer days, right? Like nature is a trickster, and we obviously need to go out into nature to fulfill our appetites, right? But it's primordial, it's chaotic, it's unpredictable, etc. There's inherently a trickster quality to it. And so many of the things that I've struggled from in my life has been misplaced appetites. Too much appetite, not enough appetite. You talk about women, you talk about food, you talk about money, achievement, whatever it may be, right? We all have natural appetites, puppy, that need to be fulfilled. And so in this myth, so it has to do with Hermes and Apollo's cattle. And so Hermes goes and he's always stealing Apollo's cattle from him, right? And Apollo's getting super pissed. He's taking his cattle, and Hermes would take it all to itself. And there was kind of this, back and forth, between the two of them, until this very specific moment where Hermes sort of decides, I don't need all of this cattle. I don't need all this meat, right? His appetite suddenly found its correct proportion. And so what he does with some of the meat, with some of the cattle, he sacrifices it to the gods, right? He gives it and turns it over to the gods. He sacrifices an aspect of his own appetite. From that, he builds a relationship with something transcendent, and then he finds greater purpose, right? So being able to create proportion within our appetites gives us purpose, right? Gives us connection to something bigger, to something transcendent. And so to riff on purpose a little bit, I actually don't believe that people should be out here running around trying to find their purpose. I think it's a backwards way of thinking about it. I think that you need to put yourself in purpose is chasing you. Purpose is chasing all of us, right? It's within us. Whatever you bring forth within you will save you. And so I think moving towards greater wholeness and greater healing and embodying certain universal qualities such as curiosity, love, openness, right? Wisdom. There are the, fortitude, temperance. There are these timeless virtues that when you begin to embody those, suddenly your awareness of what's possible, again, talking about the nervous system, becomes more clear. And purpose begins to flow through you suddenly, because purpose is not, it's not a job. It's not a role. It's actually like a feeling. It's a sense of embodiment that people are looking for. So I believe people would sort of move through different stages of consciousness until they find their purpose, right? And so I've really begun, my own journey in sort of on the sense of like victim consciousness. I had some pretty rough things happen to me in my late teens, early 20s. And I wore that like a badge, and I was angry, and I was vindictive, and I felt like a victim to my circumstance. Okay. And so I was able to kind of, I don't know, create enough distance from that and sort of jump from this sense of victimhood into this like utility consciousness or ego consciousness, where everything outside yourself is kind of in service to you and your own needs. Okay. So maybe more adaptive evolutionarily than victim consciousness, but still not quite it. Okay. And so from that ego consciousness, then being able to create proper proportion between our egos and community, to other people, to God, etc. There's kind of this initiation that takes place, this individuation. You become a part of the greater fabric of humanity. So we have victim consciousness, this ego consciousness, this sort of like initiation consciousness, and there's a lot there. We could get into that until eventually, which is kind of cheesy, but I kind of like it, like a mission consciousness, right? So I like the word mission more than purpose. And so when we find enough individuation and separateness from our wounds, from the utility of the ego, etc., there is this different signal that begins to take place, and it connects you to this way deeper fabric of reality.
I really enjoy that, finding wholeness to satisfy those misproportional appetites. It was St. Thomas Aquinas saying addiction was a result of a God-sized hole within us. And then God can be a really important way to round out that wholeness, in addition to just the fundamental holistic health principles like quality food, time outside, community, sleep. All those things are really important in that wholeness equation, and getting the nervous system operating at a high level. And then the purpose sort of just like kind of reveals itself to us.
And even within like a spiritual growth process or a therapeutic process, like I don't love the language around like healing, right? It's really a pursuit of wholeness, right? And wholeness doesn't mean fixed. It doesn't mean that we don't struggle, right? But we have an innate sort of sense of wholeness, and that is what's underneath the addiction, right? And so there's a very famous letter exchange between Carl Jung and Bill Wilson, who was the co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. And so Carl Jung writes this letter to Bill, and he says, on a low level, the alcoholic's thirst for drink is equivalent to his thirst for union with God. And then he gives this little Latin phrase, and he says, therefore, the helpful axiom is spiritus contra spiritum, spirits versus spirits, right? People are looking for wholeness in the joint. They're looking for wholeness in the bottle. And wholeness is innate. You need to receive it, right? It's not something that you have to fight for. It's something that has its own intelligence and wants to come through you. It's about creating the vessel and the container to do that. And there's kind of a couple step process that I believe, where I think that can be really helpful to allow that to come through you, which I'm happy to talk about if you want to hear about it.
I'd love to hear more about it. Yeah.
Okay. So the first thing, I call this the receiver state. Okay. So we're trying to receive creativity. We're trying to receive spiritual inspiration. We're trying to receive something that wants to come through us. The very first thing that we need, and we talked about it a little bit, is we need loose priors. And so we need like loose beliefs. So the brain is really like a prediction machine, right? It's a way to offload entropy. We predict our environment. And so we predict our environment based off of our priors, our prior experiences, our prior beliefs, etc. And so for it to attach to our beliefs and our priors, the mind is super rigid. No new information can come through, right? So we need to loosen those priors, maybe, cognitive behavioral therapy, maybe it's breath work, psychedelics, even just exercise, whatever. There's a million healthy, safe ways to do it. We loosen the priors, and then we also have to have a stable autonomic floor, because there's a reason why, breakdown and creativity are so linked, the tortured genius, because they have super loose priors. So all this information is coming out of them, but they don't have the nervous system to hold what is coming within. So then they collapse into breakdown, into nervous system dysfunction, etc. Right? So we need loose priors. We need a stable autonomic floor. We could talk about that a little bit too. And then we need some aspect of like symbolic infrastructure, some awareness of how to sort of perceive symbol in the world, to sort of think symbolically, because creativity is the relationship between like feeling, form, and function. And all of that is held within a symbol, right? When you look at a symbol, you're not just seeing the symbol. It's eliciting a response, it's eliciting a feeling. There's form within it, it's held in a form, and then it's serving a function. It's calling you toward something else simultaneously. So I don't even know how we got on this topic, but so that's kind of the procedure there, right? We need loose priors, we need a stable autonomic floor, and then we need some aspect of symbolic infrastructure to metabolize or alchemize or transmit whatever it is that's wanting to come through us. And it doesn't have to be art, it doesn't have to be big projects, it could be a conversation, etc. There's obviously nuance in here. But something is chasing you, right? And so much of the work is simply learning how to receive what that is.
I believe it was Campbell who said the mystic and the madman swim the same seas, and the mystic swims those seas with delight or something.
Yeah, very familiar with both sides of that coin. Let me tell you. I think I'm on the other side of that madness, where it's, maybe a little bit more of divine madness, which you brought this up, this book that I've been working on, the working title is The Gift of Madness. So these things are super linked.
You mentioned a phrase there I've never heard before, stable autonomic floor. What is that?
Yeah, so the floor of our nervous system is really just the baseline, right? And so you hear all this rhetoric, regulate your nervous system. Fantastic, right? But I don't actually really believe that regulation is the goal. I think reorganization is the goal, reorganizing the baseline, reorganizing the floor, because a regulated nervous system is a nervous system that can hold both poles, that can hold stress, right? That has an ability to sort of the anti-fragility to walk through high levels of stress and also be able to find deep relaxation. So think of it like a rubber band, right? And so the floor of our nervous system is how much those two poles can go in the opposite, right? And so depression and collapse and nervous system shutdown and freeze, there's no distance between those two ends of the nervous system. It's just kind of one state, just collapse. And so that is the baseline, that is the floor. And so what we need to do is we need to shift that floor, shift that baseline, so that we can hold both ends of the pole, because the nervous system naturally wants to oscillate like a wave, right? And I know you talk about this stuff too, right? There's a natural oscillation that takes place within the nervous system. And what is trauma? Trauma is a failed oscillation. It's a wave that went up in arousal and stress and then gets stuck there. It doesn't oscillate and come back down and fully process that material.
So how does one go about shifting their autonomic floor?
That's a really good question. Sometimes, in these last couple of years, I've spent so much time really exploring, I don't want to say the high level aspects of it, but kind of the nuances of it, that sometimes it's hard for me to bring it back to kind of that baseline there. But the first thing that is a fundament, it's so fundamental, is beginning to understand the relationship between your emotions, physical sensations in your body, and the environment that you're in. So when I'm working with clients, one of the first things that I have them do for the first couple weeks is create a physio-emotional inventory. So I have them set 5 timers throughout the day, just subtle little reminders. And when it goes off, just kind of ask themselves, right? Or maybe something comes up in life and you could jot it down then right there, right? But what is sort of my emotional state? What is the sensory experience in my body? Because all of our emotions have a correlating sensory experience in the nervous system. And what is my environment? What sort of stimulus am I being exposed to here? And so what happens is that, and it's not a one-to-one science, trust me, it's not a one-to-one science, but you begin to sort of identify some patterns, right? Man, when I'm super stressed, I'm tightening my hand in my right hand. I had no idea. I had no idea that in anxiety, like I'm walking around like this, right? When I'm in sadness and grief, right? All my energy kind of up here in the neck, kind of just stuck right here. I can't quite get my energy down, right? And so being able to correlate an emotion with a specific sort of sensory experience is really important. And then one of the main tools is called somatic tracking. And so once again, we want to be able to relate to our sensory self, not put it in a box, not judge it, not label it, but go into the sensory experience. Let's say I'm having an emotional reaction and I'm feeling just kind of a lot of tightness, a lot of funk. I hold a lot of my right side too for some reason. So I'll go into the sensory experience and I begin to put my awareness on the edges of that sensory experience, like literally on the boundaries of it. And with my intention, attention, and intention, I try to kind of permeate the edges of that sensory experience to kind of diffuse the energy a little bit and kind of broaden out the surface area. And you notice none of this is an intellectual process. In doing that for just a couple minutes, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever, very often it's also really important to not be goal-oriented in somatic work, because being results and goal-oriented, it just tightens those priors, right? And so allowing the results be what they may be, but I often find that by the end of that, I've found greater regulation, right? The emotion has sort of moved and metabolized through the body. On top of that, I mean, we obviously have, different temperature therapy, right? Ice baths, saunas, that type of stuff, spending time in nature. Co-regulation is a huge piece. Curiosity has actually been shown in some of the research to be like a huge fundament in a healthy ventral vagal nervous system with high parasympathetic floor. Breath work is fantastic. I think microdosing can be super helpful. I like to practice a lot of TRE, tremor release or trauma release experience, something I can't remember. But David Berceli is the main guy. He did a lot of work with Mother Teresa. And so this is when the body naturally kind of shakes and tremors and begins to discharge some of the excess stress and energy in the body, right? And so what we want to do to create that experience for the nervous system is we really want to disorient it by giving it two different mixed signals. So we give it a signal of safety. There's a bunch of different ways to do that, while simultaneously introducing stress as well. And so like a holotropic breath, breathing, exercise, muscle fatigue, these are different ways to induce stress in the body. So signals of safety, introducing stress. The nervous system begins to read that as, oh, I'm safe, I'm experiencing stress, I must be safe to release this stress and any other stress that may be sort of stuck within the nervous system as well. And so that is called somatic discharging. And all sorts of mammals and nature do this, right? I mean, we see a gazelle, you see a dog do it. It's a mammalian instinct in how the body begins to reset itself.
Yes, you can see this on those videos of a herd of gazelles that are running away from a predator like a cheetah. Maybe one gets taken down and you see the other one fast enough to survive. And you see him sort of like shaking, like, ooh, just like, get that out of there.
And then they just move on. And then they just move on. Yeah. Which is an amazing process. But if anybody is interested in TRE or has done any TRE, my advice would be not to get stuck there. It's, in my personal experience, my sort of tremoring has been like a 2-3 year process, which is again what some of the literature says. But some people can really get stuck within the tremoring and not move on to the final integration piece. And I think it's because, the body-mind works differently. So the body-mind can begin to associate release with integration. And release isn't necessary integration. So the body will be constantly releasing, but then not actually moving the needle forward, right? So some people can, in some ways, get stuck there as well, too.
The portfolio of practices available to any one individual can be a little bit overwhelming. Even just the ones we've covered in this conversation, probably just the tip of the iceberg, but it is so much. It's difficult just being empathetic with someone who is struggling with this kind of stuff to think like, where do I start? Like, how do I even like, what do I begin to try? Which one do I integrate into my life first? What will be the most valuable one for me? There's so much out there for us to put into play.
So much out there. So similarly to other things like writing or business or sales or marketing or whatever it may be, right? Instead of tactics and strategies, think principles. Think principles. So the first principle is just going to be breath, right? So when we have a longer exhale than our inhale, it's naturally giving us a physiological cue to down regulate. When we have a longer or more intense inhale versus our exhale, like breath of fire in yoga, you've seen that, that's going to be like up regulating the arousal in our nervous system. So really beginning to build awareness around breath, beginning to play with breath. I hate to say manipulate breath, but kind of dance with breath a little bit. That's really going to be like one of the main primary principles. The other one, I think, has to do more so with the approach and with beliefs, right? And it kind of circles back to this idea of regulating the nervous system, that you should just be calm all the time, that like if you're stressed or irritable or whatever, you must not be regulated, etc. Like just throw that out the window. Again, the goal is to stretch the rubber band onto to each side as well. But ultimately, it's about the relationship between bracing and relaxing. So think about before you get in an ice bath or before you're going to get in a super cold shower, right? Like, what does your body do right before you get in? Yeah, you brace.
Like brace.
You brace.
Yeah.
Exactly. So many of us are walking around here like braced all the time, and we don't even know it because it's just the baseline.
Yeah.
Right? So really thinking about not bracing, not contracting is super fundamental, right? And so, well, what do you think? Do you want me to go a little bit more high level again, or?
Yeah, I would love to hear a little more high level. I'll just add a little piece of extra information in here within the concept of the body mind, and maybe we can circle back to this because I know we were both passionate about this as a core concept. But that bracing, it's almost like which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Are you stressed and then you brace, or are you stressed because you're bracing? There's
exactly
a lot of
it's probably a parallel thing, right?
Yeah.
And so this is why people may be dense in their body, may have some density, may be a little bloated, maybe walking around bracing all the time and not really have any awareness. Because what actually happens and how I make sense of it and how I believe trauma is stored in the body. Because again, you hear that rhetoric all the time too, right? Trauma is stored in your body. Like, what does that mean? It's actually more patterned. They're motor patterns of our fight, flight, free that didn't get to complete. And the pattern sort of loads in the body the same way it was supposed to offload. So what that means is that it shows up in our posture. It shows up in our gait, right? It shows up in the way we move and relate to space around us. So it's not adaptive energetically for us to be walking around all the time braced. It costs way too much energy. It's way too high of an allostatic load. And so what happens is there's this model, Michael Edward Johnson, it's called the vasocomputation model. So what happens is that underneath our muscles, we have this kind of like smooth muscular latches. And so as opposed to being braced all the time, we get these little latches that latch onto the bone underneath the muscle in a super rigid sort of dense way, literally bracing, holding on, but it's underneath the surface. And so the amount of latches or what that sort of vasculature looks like becomes our baseline. So we may not have any awareness that we're walking around bracing or with sort of this density in our body because they're sort of latched and existing in a deeper, lower place because it doesn't cost as much energy for the system, right? So that sounds all nice and hand wavy and woo woo and all of this stuff, right? But like, what does that mean? What does that look like, right? And so I think, obviously opening up the rib cage and getting proper diaphragmatic movement. And so I really encourage people when they're exploring any type of breath, not to aim for intensity, not to aim for speed, but really to aim for volume, to really try and create sort of that mobility within the rib cage, especially like in our back and our back ribs as well too, to get that pelvic floor going. Another one, and this is one of the ones that I started with, which is really incredible, kind of funny, cheesy, whatever, but the perineum. So very often too, that sort of bracing, like we can be so tight down there in our pelvic floor. And this is the root of, ED, premature ejaculation, right? Like a lot of men probably are running around with a super, super tight pelvic floor. And you hear about Kegels, right? Strengthening that even more, which is great. But like reverse Kegels, being able to relax the root, that baseline of our pelvis, of the perineum through breath, maybe through some manual, this is so funny, some manual stimulation, whatever. But really being able to create greater relaxation at like that base of the spine, again, it's just going to be conducive for that flow of energy.
Touched on a few themes there around tightness and expansion, and I'm curious about the power of touch and the healing potential that could be applied. I know you mentioned some manual therapy in the perineum. I know we can sort of massage ourselves and get a lot of body work that would help sort of release some of this. Do you have any sort of experience or thought around that modality?
Yeah, not quite as much. One of the things that I like to do when I'm working with people is sort of throughout kind of, if I'm in person, throughout kind of the talk therapy session, whatever the content is, etc., I have people sort of get on the floor. Okay. And so naturally they're going to get down and you're going to notice, and I don't tell them to lay straight on their back, just like whatever's comfortable. Right. And so as we're sort of talking through some content, I just begin to open up their posture, right? So if their arms are here by their sides, like I literally will put my feet under the elbows right here and just lift their arm up, and maybe take my foot and just flip their arm up this way. And then do the same and kind of open the hips up and sort of taking the body out of a defensive position into one that is more open, right? And obviously it's not a one-to-one, and I'm still trying to figure all this shit out myself, right? All my stuff is kind of self-experimentation first, and then usually friends and people who are willing to let me get in there with them. But when you begin to open up the posture through breath, really opening up that front chain and the spine, especially, in any way that you can to remove and open up the neck big time, because you want to be able to get some more of the cerebral spinal fluid up into the brain there. People's emotions begin to open up too. And there's something about closing your eyes, and we know this in massage, when like you got your hands on you, there's something so nourishing about that. There's something so primal and kind of maternal and primordial about that. And so I just kind of play with people's posture a little bit. And what's important about it too is that people's resistance will come up too, right? So if I'm with my hands or my feet beginning to open them up, and I can feel, and they can feel the system not wanting to relax and let go and allow me to open them up, right? And then it's, oh, what was that? What was that right there? I just saw that, right? What's going on for you there? As more of the curiosity, like an exploration. So it begins to be this kind of dance back and forth between like the talk aspects of it and then just manipulating the presentation of the body. Because the nervous system, it really reorganizes itself around novel experiences. So when you experience a novel emotion, right, both good and bad, ideally good, the body-mind begins to organize its behavior around seeking more of that novelty, that nourishment. So allowing people to have a novel experience in how they're relating to their body, into what their emotions that are coming out there. The body-mind puts a little pin in it. It's like this little North Star, this little anchor point. And the body-mind is way more intelligent than our conscious mind. And it begins to sort of reorganize its behavior in pursuit of that thing of which is so nourishing.
That's fascinating.
It is fascinating, right? Yeah.
I've really enjoyed this conversation, and we've gone all over the place. And I feel like there's a strong central theme here of different ways in which one can become more capable, more aligned, more energized. And I know we've just barely scratched the surface of the things that you know and the things that you do. And I feel like we're coming near the conclusion of the hour-long conversation that we've got planned. So I'd like to inquire as to what is energizing you these days. You've got all these tools. You've got yourself into a place where you're able to manage the flow of life in a much better way than you could before, and you're able to be of service, and you've found your mission. And what is it that is making you dance these days?
Yeah. Well, that's, to be honest, dance. I think I dance almost every single day, to be frank. That's that joy right there. And that's a big part of the integration. Stillness. I mean, this sounds super cliche in so many ways, but I love reading. I'm such a big reader. I've been reading just this one same book this entire year. It's Yogananda, The Second Coming of Christ. It's absolutely incredible. But honoring my creativity, honoring what it is that wants to come out of me, honoring the labor, understanding the value in the labor is really my North Star right now. I'm also somebody who, I can go to the nuances, and I like to talk high level, and sometimes I get a little clinical or academic or whatever. But I also love to just play some sports with the boys, watch a basketball game, that type of stuff too. But it's really about maintaining, curating, and expanding that sort of inner mansion that I was talking about here, right? And so lots of prayer, lots of time on my knees, lots of time with books, lots of time in meditation, and just about creating space as much as possible in my life, because it's the only way that what it is that's going to come through me has the room for it to come through me, On top of that, I'm trying to think what else. Romance, my relationship with my girlfriend, super, super nourishing. But just new relationships as well too. I try to maintain a vertical relationship to transcendence, to God, and then horizontal relationships as well, right? Like being in community, right? Standing shoulder to shoulder with other men. Like that is just I am just a 10 times better individual when I have men to account to, that are keeping me on my game, and men to lean into and have conversations like this, So maintaining a vertical relationship, maintaining horizontal relationships, and just letting the creativity kind of be the North Star, truly, and getting the fuck out of results.
Powerful. Well, I've really enjoyed this conversation and getting to know you and seeing the oak tree that you're becoming. I'm excited to see where it grows from here, and I'll include links down below where everyone will be able to find your work. And Brian, it was a pleasure. Thank you for taking the time.
Brother. Love you, man. Thank you.
Love you as well.
All right, brother. Cheers. That was fun.
That was great.
Yeah, dude. Hell yeah.
Thank you.
You got it, man. What a treat, dude.